Think of a ceiling fan as nothing more than a little more sophisticated light fixture. It's going to go in the same place as your light fixtures are. If you're running an installation with a light fixture, obviously your first thing to do would be to take the first light fixture down off the ceiling. As you do that, you're going to want to mark your wires so you know what wire is neutral, what wire is hot, and what wire is the switch wire. In a lot of older buildings, there's still cloth wiring up there, and sometimes it's hard to see the colors of some of this old cloth wiring. But normally you're going to have a white, a black, and a red. On newer installations with newer wiring, those colors could be any color at all. So as you take the light fixture down, you're going to notice usually two colors on the light socket itself, white and black. The white is going to a neutral. You want to mark that wire up in the ceiling as the neutral white. If there's a switch on the wall, the other black wire that comes out of the light fixture is going to be a switch wire coming off the wall. You're going to want to mark that as the switch wire. If the fixture has a pull chain on it and there's no switch on the wall, then your other wire up in the ceiling is going to be a hot, and you're going to want to mark that as a hot. If in fact there is no switch on the wall, now would obviously be the time to install a switch, which that's our next class. So we'll get into that during the next class, because that involves pulling wire and all sorts of things like that. But now would be the time to do it if you're modernizing the apartment. Most ceiling fans can be run just off pull chain switches themselves. They'll have a pull chain switch for the light, and they'll have a separate pull chain switch for the fan speeds. Reversing a fan requires getting up on a ladder to usually flip a toggle switch back and forth. That's usually not available on a remote, on most remotes, especially if you're using only the pull chains. So that gives you the type of ceiling fan installations that can be done at that point. So again, test and mark the fixtures. If there's a switch on the wall, you'll want to turn the switch off. If there is no switch on the wall, you'll want to go find the circuit that controls that hot wire up in the ceiling and either turn the circuit breaker or pull the fuse out just as you're working on it. It just makes it a little safer. Again, if you were going to start modernizing your wire, now's the time to do it. Come back for the next class and we'll teach you how to do that. If in fact this is a remodeling situation and there is a current box up there, don't be afraid to use that box. Even though there are new fan rated boxes out on the market, especially if you have a lot of old cloth wiring that you don't want to touch. And I don't want to touch, by the way. If I don't have to, I would use the old box that's up there. We've been hanging ceiling fans from a standard electric box for the last 40, 50 years. The only advent on the newer fan-rated boxes, due to the earthquake regulations coming out of California, they just use heavy screws and heavier mounting brackets. But the ceiling fan can be mounted to a standard electric box up in the ceiling. Don't worry about it. Two types of installation fan kits are available. One, if you're running new construction and the ceiling is not finished yet, you can use a normal fan bracket that screws to the joists, mount the ceiling box on it, and then you're going to put your ceiling up and away you go, and you have a fan rated box. Most of these fan rated boxes, by the way, have dual screws in them, and you can see these pivots here. The heavier fan bracket screw, like a 10, 24 screw for the ceiling fans. You can take that out, pivot this down, and you'll have a smaller 832 hole for standard mounting of a ceiling fixture. 832 is your standard ceiling screw for most ceiling boxes. Again, that was the earthquake rated type box. Not necessarily needed in the Chicago area, even though we do get some earthquakes, you know, close to us, but nothing like California does. In remodeling situation, if in fact you don't have a ceiling box where you want to mount this fan, you can use a remodeling box. What this does is the bracket itself is not solid, but it's one giant screw thread. And all you're going to be doing is cutting, let's say, a 4-inch diameter round hole in the ceiling. Find where the joists are. Obviously, you don't want to cut, you don't want to cut right on the joist, so you're going to be either using a stud finder or the old knuckle type thing and banging on it. Make sure where you're going to drill is hollow. And then this bracket gets inserted up into that hole, twisted around so the points on the bracket are facing the studs, and you start unscrewing it, basically to spread it apart so these end brackets bite into the ceiling joists. At which point you're going to take a pliers, channel locks preferably, twist this thing so that these points in here fully embed themselves into the joists, and it goes nowhere, absolutely nowhere. And at that point, that bracket will be centered over your hole. You just mount the fan right to it then, the fan box right to it with the U-bolt. U-bolt will stick down over the rod. Okay, and it just then bolts, the box bolts right to that U-bracket and up tight to the bracket that's in the ceiling already. And you've got a fan-safe bracket up in a new installation. You haven't cut a big hole at all. Again, I didn't get into the wiring for this type of box because we'll save that for our next class of running the wiring and switches and outlets. If in fact you were remodeling and or there is a switch there now, there's a couple ways you can go in terms of controlling the fan. If you only had one switch on the wall and you wanted that switch still to control the light, that could be done, and then the fan controlled by the pull chain itself. So your switch on the wall, you're just going to leave that one switch. You can have that switch turning the light on the fan on and off and control the fan itself on and off and the speeds through the pull chain itself. Normally your fan wiring, you'll see most fans will have 3 wires on them to begin with. A black wire for the fan, a blue wire for the light kit, and your neutral. So you can easily identify what you want to go to a hot wire, what you want to go to a switch wire, and what you want to go to the neutral wire. There are a couple different types of controllers you can use. If in fact there is no switch on the wall and you don't want to use the pull chains, you can use a remote. No switch required. But there is an insert that has to go into the fan. In most fans, there's plenty of room for these inserts between the ceiling and the bracket, or between the bracket and the ball on certain different fans. And then your fans and your light are strictly controlled by a handheld remote. Now there is a bracket that comes with this that screws to the wall. You can just put it on the wall or leave it on your coffee table, whatever you want. But it's easier if you mount it near the door or whatever. That way you can just tap a button and your lights come on if you don't want the fan on. So you have a remote switch for your light also. If in fact you still only have the one wire there from a light switch, but you want to control your fan and your lights from the switching without doing any rewiring, you have a wall mount controller, okay, that will control your fan and your lights. But again, there's an insert in here that has to be inserted into the fan because these two units talk to each other through that switch wire. Okay? So again, it's very similar to a remote, except now your remote is wired into an existing switch box on the wall. And the other way to go about it is if you wanted not to mount a module in the fan. This is a wall mount controller, but this controller requires 3 wires. It requires a hot wire to run it, and it requires 2 switch wires going back up to the ceiling fans. So most installations aren't going to have that. There's a very simple way to control it. It goes around the electronic controls, and it's just a pure switch, but it requires more wiring. So you would have to pull wire to get more wire up to that ceiling fan from an existing box, which is not a problem if it's in conduit. If it's in BX, it's a problem. Any questions so far? There are 2 basic types of ceiling fans on the market. No matter how small or how big they are, you'll see basically what is known as a hugger fan that mounts with a larger collar direct up to the ceiling, or a downrod fan, which has a downrod that can be 3 inches, 6 inches. You can get downrod extensions that can go like to 4 feet. If you're hanging in a big cathedral ceiling and you want this fan lower, you can see extension rods. Those are 4-foot rods, and there's some even longer than that. So you're not stuck when you have a downrod fan. You're not stuck with the little downrod that comes with the fan. You can take this downrod out of this ball. I could put a 4-foot downrod on here, and that's your installation. I've set the height where I wanted it at that point. You can see a typical downrod installation here, where this is the support. This little bracket right here is the support for the whole ceiling fan. It is imperative that this bracket be mounted solidly to the ceiling. You want no wobble on this thing whatsoever. That's why it has little rubber cushions in it. It's got the screw slots that line up with a standard ceiling box, whether it's a fan box or an old ceiling pan. Those slots line up with these screws. If in fact you have an older installation, and you'll see a lot of older installations, they'll have a pan like this up in the ceiling, but it'll be black and it won't have any screw ears. Okay? Most of those installations will have some sort of center gas pipe sticking out of the center. Okay? Normally a 3/8 inch gas pipe. Not all of them, but probably 95% of them will, because the electric box was an afterthought to gas lighting from the 1920s. So a lot of them will have that gas pipe there. Probably one of the easiest ways to mount this kind of bracket, not a top hat bracket, but bracket with a hole in the center just a little flat bracket, is use that center gas pipe. That center gas pipe is nailed to the joist everywhere. It's going nowhere. All you need at that point is a bigger washer, and a 3/8 inch nut, and you've mounted that bracket to the ceiling. Okay? Relatively easy. If in fact you don't have a center gas pipe and you have a ceiling fan without any screw ears on it and you don't want to touch the wiring, which is fine, there are two ways still to mount a ceiling fan to those old boxes. One would be to drill and tap the box. Basically what you would be doing is taking this measurement. Obviously there's going to be no screw tabs here at all. You're going to drill the box very close to the edge, just like this screw mounts close to the edge, okay? And then you're going to take the corresponding tap and tap threads into that box, okay, right at the bottom of the box. You're going to do that twice, all right? I recommend, there's two taps that I would recommend, either a 1032, which most electricians use, or in some of the heavier boxes, you might go to a slightly thicker thread, a 1024. Those are just heavier screws than a standard fixture would take, braiding the screw back to the ceiling fans. When you pick a tap, there'll be a corresponding drill number associated with that tap. Here I both have two 10 taps, one 1024 and one 1032. They take different drills. One takes a number 25 machinist drill. The other one takes a 21 machinist drill. That's just because of the depth of those threads. They take different drills. And when I say, we have these drills, by the way, that's why they're sitting here. They're machinist drills, they're numbered, okay? They're not 1/8, they're not 3/16, they are actually numbered from, we'll go from number 1 to about 40, and then some letters after that. And they're not expensive, they cost about what a regular drill bit would cost. They're just machinist drills to match to the taps. Or if you're feeling really extravagant, this has both of them on it. Actually, this has 6 different taps on it. 632, 832, 1032, and then the heavier 24 thread on the other tap. The other way to go about it, which is about the same, it takes about 5 minutes actually, 5 to 10 minutes to drill these holes and tap them. It's no big project at all. The other way to go about it is to use what we call a jack nut. It's a threaded insert. Again, I picked the 1024 short threaded insert because all it's doing is going on a piece of sheet metal. What I'd be doing, again, trying to locate these threaded inserts approximately where these screws would be placed on a standard new box. You're going to drill a 3/8 inch hole for this piece of equipment here, all right? You would insert that into the hole, and then once that is inserted into the hole, you're going to take the proper screw and this wrench, okay? This wrench will hold the threaded insert steady as you tighten the screw, and as you tighten the screw, these wings will flare out and this will crush down onto the box. So it's almost like a threaded rivet, if you want to call it that. We call it a threaded insert. And you'll notice once I tighten that screw that this box or this insert is going nowhere. This wrench is now holding it, okay, steady. And as I tighten that screw, it's going to compress. The wings will flare out, and it'll flare out on the top of this box. And then once I remove that screw, that threaded insert will be stationary in this box. It's a threaded rivet, if you want to call it that. The reason this wrench can hold it steady is you'll see a lot of little points on this wrench right here. Okay, and in here you'll see little indentations along the perimeter of the threaded insert. Once they mate with pressure, it sort of becomes one piece, and then it just compresses itself and flares out.
Well, what's the reason for that? What's the reason for that rather than a wood screw?
Well, number one, this is a steel box. Why would you want to use a wood screw on it? No, I'm talking about, this is an old installation. The box is already in the ceiling. But it's an old box with no screw ears on it, which is very common in this area. So now you have actually 3 ways to mount the ceiling fan in an old installation. The center pipe, if it's there, with just a nut and a washer to hold the fan bracket itself steady through the center mounting hole, if that's the kind of bracket you have. If you have what's known as a top hat bracket that comes up and flares out on each side, then you can't use this method at all. Then you have to use either drilling and tapping the old box or putting the threaded inserts in it. On one of my last classes, I actually sat here and did both. I tapped the box and I used that. Tapping the box and putting the threads in was like a 5-minute, installation. All I did was, drill a hole, take the tap, take it out, done. So it's not a big project at all. Threaded inserts are the same. All you do is drill the hole, put the threaded insert in, put the screw in through the wrench, tighten it down, done. So don't be afraid to mount a ceiling fan on an old box with no screw ears. It's very easy. Here you can see a down rod type installation. Obviously the rod would be coming through here. Sometimes these, in fact, even on the hugger fan, you usually have at least 2 screws on each side, 4 total. Sometimes you need a small screwdriver in order to start these screws. Your larger screwdriver with your larger handle sometimes goes at an angle because it's hitting the ceiling very close here. So sometimes a very small screwdriver will help get them started. Or sometimes what is known as a screw starter also, which holds the screw steady. It's a little piece of metal about like that to start the screws. I've always found that those come in handy trying to put these canopies up onto the ceiling box, the bracket itself. Then we get basically into putting the ceiling fan together. One of the things from, unfortunately, sad experience that I've had is sometimes these ceiling fans don't work. I won't say ours do it, but I've put in a lot of ceiling fans from other places. In fact, one installation I had to put the ceiling fan in 4 times because every time the client brought a ceiling fan in, it didn't work for one reason or another. Whether it was the motor, the remote controls, whatever, it wasn't working. If in fact you can, as you pull the fan and all the parts out of the box, if it's a pull chain installation, or the fan still is rated with 2 pull chains, if you can test the motor ahead of time before assembling this whole thing and put it up, do it. All you're doing is basically hooking a hot and a neutral wire up and making sure that motor turns. Very easy to, hook a couple wires up to a plug. Just make sure that motor works before you spend an hour putting this fan together, getting it hung on the ceiling, flipping the switch, and it doesn't work.
Any brand names you can say are some of these that don't work?
I will say that Westinghouse has a limited 5-year guarantee and it's an excellent fan. Other than that, but yeah, it's a sad fact that I've gone through a number of ceiling fans that just didn't work for whatever reason, and sometimes you get what you pay for, and
Are we allowed to put oil into it? And also, when you say
no.
No, and when you say it doesn't work, does that mean it wobbles or it doesn't move at all? And
It doesn't move at all.
How about if
Just
it
didn't
hums,
work.
it stays stationary, but it's humming because it's stuck?
Well, again, that means it doesn't work. Take it back and get another one. Now, oil. No, none of these fans will take oil. There are probably only 1 or 2 fans on the market that take oil today. All these bearings in these motors are sealed for life. No WD-40 gets sprayed into them, no oil gets dripped into them, no nothing like that, because that'll get onto the windings and burn the motor. Some of the Hunter fans, the originals, and some of the Casablanca fans, the originals, and they still sell them today, by the way. They have excellent motors in them. Usually the motors are solid cast iron, they're heavy, and they have bearings that need oil. But normally you're only going to do this maybe once every 5 years or so. In order to oil, because they have oil reservoirs in their bearings. Would you want to check it yearly? Possibly, depending on how much you use the fan and how hot it gets in the apartment, but normally I believe it's once every 5 years that they need oil. And those fans, by the way, are way up on the expensive side. You're probably looking at $500-600 fans at that point also, because those are some of the original fans going back probably now 60 to 80 years, and they still make them, and they're very, very limited in scope. Each manufacturer might have 3 of them in their inventory.
And those would probably be outdoor fans too, right? Not necessarily.
Especially your outdoor rated fans today are going to have sealed bearings in them, so no moisture gets in them. The difference mainly between an outdoor fan and an indoor fan, the blades themselves, instead of laminated wood, are going to be a plastic material, so they can't warp. The material, there are stainless steel outdoor fans, by the way. But most of them will have a powder coat on them, so that the paint is a little tougher than paint, and or the plating is a little tougher on an outdoor fan than it will be on an indoor fan, just because of the weather. And these outdoor fans, by the way, are all in, I won't say enclosed porches, but they're not getting rained on, so to speak. They have at least a solid deck over them, a roof-type deck, not a slotted wood where water can bounce off the fan. That's still a no-no. They're in areas that are not going to get rained on. They may get the moisture, but they're not going to get rained on directly. They may, in a heavy rain, they may get a little spray sideways, but not direct pouring right down on the top of the fan. They're not rated for that at all. All right, we've wired the fan up, we've wired the bracket, the down rod, or at least you know, the larger bracket here up into the ceiling. Basically all we have, as I said, in any fan installation, there's going to be 3 wires unless the fan came with a remote already with it. You'll have your neutral wire, white, your black wire for the fan, and your blue wire for the light kit if there is one. In fact, a lot of the fans will even have a blue wire in them, even if they don't have the light kit on them. So a light kit could be added at a different date. Any fan without a light kit, you can always add a light kit to it. And most of that wiring will be in the body of the fan somewhere ready to go. It's just not being used, that's all. And not being wired up in the canopy itself. So if you bought a fan and a separate light kit, you'll obviously want to make sure that blue wire is wired correctly so the light kit will function. Installation of one of these things, most of them, unless you get one of the speedier contractor fans, it's from start to finish will take about an hour if you don't run into any problems. Most of them, you have to screw the bracketry together to the fan blade. That takes 3 screws, 5 blades, that's 15 screws. Fiddling around, you know, 20 minutes later, your fan and your brackets are there. Once you mount the ball into the bracket, by the way, this is hung loose on the fan. All you're doing is taking that ball, bringing it up into the bracket and hooking it in solidly. You'll see, you know, and that you'll see a groove here in the ball, and obviously a little tab, if you can see it, where that groove fits. There's a little tab on the hole. You can see that. Once that's snapped in proper, then the canopy can be put up and screwed up tight to the ceiling. Once you got the motor mounted, then it's time to put the fan blades on. I like to put the fan blades on after the motor is up and mounted, simply because it's a lot easier to take that motor without the blades, because the blades are going to be hitting you in the head, to get it up there. And okay, and then it's just a matter of taking the blades and a screwdriver or your little, you know, powered screwdriver, and hold the bracket up and start putting the screws in. You know, especially if you're high on a ladder and you're trying to balance a fan and you've got, you know, your head up through the blades and you're trying to, no, it's safer sometimes just to do it the hard way, or the long way, as I say, just to get the fan up there and steady, and then the canopy screwed to the ceiling bracket, and then mount the blades.
And that just makes it heavier.
Then the blades make it they make it heavier and awkward is what they do. You know, if you have 2 people and a platform, no problem. But if you're doing this alone and on a tall ladder, sometimes you want to be safer and take a little more time, you know. So that's what I always try to do. At that point, normally the light kits don't come mounted to the fan, or if they do, at least the glass is not on them, which is a separate thing, but a lot of the light kits have to be mounted separately. And there's, you know, just plug them together and then screw the light kit to the fan, you know, install the bulbs and you're done. Now, we've mounted our fan solidly to the ceiling. We turned it on, it works, but there's a little wobble to it. There's 2 things you can do. Number 1, obviously, turn the fan off. Now, make sure that that ball with the groove, that groove is locked into that tab because you won't be able to turn the ball, okay? If the ball turns like that, that's part of your problem, is that the groove is not locked into the tab. Okay, that's one problem. Make sure, again, that this bracket here is tight against the ceiling. If you can take this canopy and turn it, it's not tight, okay? So I've done something wrong. I haven't made sure that this bracket is tight against the ceiling. That would be two problems. Third problem would be if one of these brackets is bent, okay? Easy way to check that, you take a tape measure from the ceiling to the tip of the blade, okay? And then you hand rotate every blade where that mark is without moving the tape, and there shouldn't be more than an 1/8 inch variance between every blade. If one is an inch, a 1/2 inch down or up, you can usually very gently, and I'll stress again, very gently, try and bend these brackets back to the proper position. If you put too much force on them, they're just going to snap, okay? In which case, if that was the case, I'd say, again, return it to where you bought it. If you snap the bracket, you know, because it's so far out of whack, because they shouldn't be. They should be right dead on. But sometimes a little warpage in the blade, sometimes, you know, a little carelessness in shipping. Right. Okay, once you make sure everything's tight, the ball's tight, all the fan blades are at the right height, no more than a 1/8 inch variance, and I'd even go no more than 1/4, but no more than that. And that's an 1/8 inch either way, okay? 1/4 inch total between blades, not between the mark. So you're still dealing with about an 1/8 inch clearance per blade, 1/4 inch clearance overall. Turn the fan back on and check for wobble. If in fact there still is a little wobble, then we get into what would be a balancing kit for the fan blades themselves. If you want to take these and pass them back, I won't get into the balancing. Sometimes balancing a fan can take half hour or more because it's trial and error with these balance kits, and you might need more than one balance kit, you might, you know, need not. Again, on a new fan installation, I've never had to use a balance kit. It's mainly from older fans that have been up for a while, that the fan blades have absorbed moisture from humidifiers, they're slightly worn, whatever, that, you know, I've had to go in and balance. But I've not had a new installation where I've had to balance a fan. They should come from the factory balanced. And if, in fact, you've done everything right, you know you have, and this fan is wobbling severely, take it back. And just tell them you want another one, because they shouldn't be that far out of balance. Not a new fan. I don't care where you bought it from. It should not be out of balance like that. So it's mainly older installations where you can get a little wear possibly in the bearing, possibly again, just from being up and running, the blades are going to get a little wear on them. You're going to probably be cleaning the fan blades maybe once or twice a year. That cleaning is going to take some of the finish off. So, and these things are spinning at, you know, a relatively high RPM. They could be a little out of balance by an ounce or whatever, you know, and that's where the balance kit comes in.